Freedom of speech and thought matters, especially when it is speech and thought with which we disagree. The moment the majority decides to destroy people for engaging in thought it dislikes, thought crime becomes a reality.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking another deep dive into a really fascinating topic,
Oh, yeah.
and that's freedom of speech and thought.
You got it.
As always, you guys sent in some really incredible material to dig into.
Yeah, definitely some thought-provoking stuff.
This time we're going to be focusing on a quote from Ben Shapiro.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that you sent to us. So let's get right into it, all right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so this is the quote, and I think this is a good one.
Okay.
Freedom of speech and thought matters, especially when it is speech and thought
Okay.
with which we disagree.
Right.
The moment the majority decides to destroy people
Yeah.
for engaging in thought it dislikes, thought crime becomes a reality.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Right. And I think it's something that's especially relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see debates about free speech, and censorship everywhere you look.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how would you unpack this concept of thought crime that Shapiro's talking about? What are the dangers of limiting free expression?
Well, I think the most, I guess the scariest thing about thought crime is that it punishes people for what they're thinking, not even for what they do or say. You know, it creates this atmosphere where people are afraid to even question things or to think differently. And that's a recipe for a really oppressive society.
Totally. And like, I'm thinking of examples, historical examples where this has happened, where thought suppression led to some pretty terrible consequences.
Right. Well, I mean, the most obvious example is probably like Nazi Germany, where any kind of dissent against the Nazi ideology was, ruthlessly crushed.
Absolutely.
But you can also see it in other totalitarian regimes throughout history, like the Soviet Union under Stalin, where just expressing a different opinion could get you sent to a gulag, imprisoned or even killed.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
And, it's interesting because
even though we may not see those kind of extreme examples in most democratic countries today, there are still subtle ways that thought crime can manifest itself.
Okay, so like what would be some examples of that?
Well, like think about cancel culture and online shaming.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be held accountable for their actions, but sometimes it feels like people are getting punished just for having an unpopular opinion or for questioning a certain narrative.
Yeah, it's like that line between holding people accountable and also allowing people to express their opinions.
Exactly. And I think it's really important to be mindful of that line.
I was also thinking about, like this idea of the harm principle.
Oh, yeah. John Stuart Mill.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the idea that we should only limit someone's free speech if it's going to directly cause harm to others.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really tricky thing to define, what constitutes harm.
Yeah. And who gets to decide that?
Yeah, and that leads to a question that I've been thinking about a lot.
Oh, yeah.
How do we balance this need to protect free speech with, the desire to prevent hate speech or really harmful ideas from spreading?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. It feels impossible sometimes.
Yeah, and I don't think there's an easy answer. I mean, part of it comes down to, like you said, who gets to decide what is harmful. Because if you give too much power to any one group or authority, they could easily abuse that power to silence dissenting voices or to suppress viewpoints that they just don't like.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about this in the context of social media.
Oh, absolutely.
Because these platforms have become such powerful forces in shaping public discourse.
I mean, they're basically the new public square where people go to exchange ideas and debate. And, the decisions that these companies make about content moderation have a huge impact on what we see and hear.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's a really tricky area.
Right, because on the one hand, they're private companies and they have the right to set their own rules. But on the other hand, they're so big and influential that they function almost like public utilities.
They do.
So it raises all sorts of questions about censorship and free speech in the digital age.
Right, and I think that kind of brings us back to the Shapiro quote.
Yeah.
What we were talking about at the beginning. This idea that free speech is most important when it's speech that we disagree with.
Yeah.
But how do you see that playing out?
Well, I think it's a reminder that we can't just shut down ideas that we find offensive or that we don't agree with. Because even if those ideas are wrong or harmful, we need to be able to engage with them and debate them because that's how we learn and grow.
Absolutely. That's how we move forward as a society.
Right. And it's how we make sure that the best ideas ultimately prevail.
I think that's a fantastic point to wrap up on. I really appreciate you joining me on this deep dive.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
You've given us a lot to think about.
I hope so.
And I hope our listeners will keep this conversation going.
Yeah, me too.
It's clearly a complex topic and one that deserves ongoing discussion.
Definitely.
So until next time, everyone, keep thinking critically and keep those conversations going.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again.
Cheers.